for coming this morning. I want to welcome you to this morning's lecture, which is jointly sponsored by Mississippi State University Fish Innovation Lab and the Social Science Research Center, who work collaboratively in implementing the Fish Innovation Lab program here, which has been in existence at Mississippi State University for just over a year now. And so our speaker today has been a very important partner for us in this program. And so as we were launching our program, we initiated a couple of projects for the Fish Innovation Lab in Zambia. And so that's where we ran into Dr. Steve Cole. Dr. Steve Cole is a social scientist, received his bachelor's degree from Miami University of Ohio, and his master's degree also there?
At Arizona.
At the University of Arizona. And did his master's and PhD at University of Arizona. And that was in 2012, I believe.
Oh, finished, yeah.
Yeah. And so since that time, he spent 6 years working at World Fish, implementing World Fish programs in Zambia. So World Fish is focused on development of aquaculture and optimizing harvesting of natural fisheries in developing countries. And Zambia is one of the countries where they are working. Zambia is located in southern Africa, and aquaculture is starting to take hold and growing in Zambia. And so as we implemented a couple of projects, Dr. Cole was a very important partner with us in Zambia and worked very closely with Dr. Kathleen Ragsdale's and Mary Reed Wahidi's team, implementing their project on Fisher Village and Lake Bangweulu in Zambia. And Dr. Cole was an important part of that. Another project we implemented. Since then, he has moved to the International Institute of Tropical Agriculture in Tanzania. So he's been there less than a year now, but we still like working with Dr. Cole so much that we brought him from Tanzania to Mississippi State University to help us in the Fish Innovation Lab develop a tool that we're going to use to measure and monitor implementation of gender-specific programs in all the projects that we implement around the world. We've been here working with our team for the last few days, and he was kind enough to agree to give a seminar to us today and talk about his research and implementation of gender-specific and the role of gender in implementation of agricultural projects worldwide. And so, Dr. Cole, thank you again for coming all the way to Mississippi State University, and thank you for agreeing to speak to us. We look forward to it.
All right, thanks. Thanks, Dr. Lawrence. All right, greetings, everyone. That was a nice introduction, and thanks very much. It's a great honor to be here and be able to speak in front of this group, and I thank you all for coming out and taking time to listen today. So the talk will be on gender dynamics in small-scale fisheries and aquaculture, and so we'll move forward. So the presentation, it kind of has three main parts, really. First, just highlighting the importance of small-scale fisheries and aquaculture to livelihood security, especially in low-income countries. Country context, and then I'll spend the bulk of the presentation kind of going through some key gender dynamics in the two sectors and within value chains in these sectors, and then focus on one major knowledge and evidence gap, and then some ways forward on how we might be able to fill that gap through our research, and in particular, our research for development efforts. So a bit of introduction, and I won't have to go into too much because of the great one done by Dr. Lawrence. But if you don't know about the CGIAR and the CGIAR centers, there's 15 international agriculture centers around the globe. And the CG kind of headquarters is based in Montpellier, France, and then I'm based at IITA. Its headquarters is in Ibadan, Nigeria. And then I'm based in Dar es Salaam, Tanzania. And then I used to work, as Dr. Lawrence talked about, for World Fish, which is based in Penang, Malaysia. I was based in Lusaka, Zambia, and again, that's how I ran into this group while working there. A little bit about IITA, I'll just kind of focus on the mission. It's leading research partnership that facilitates agricultural solutions to hunger, poverty, and natural resource degradation throughout sub-Saharan Africa. We have kind of focus on 4 main bodies of work, and then I'm housed in the social science and agribusiness unit of the institution, and that's where I coordinate all of the gender research for IITA. We're kind of spread out throughout Africa. We're the only center in the system that only works in Africa. And so we've got hubs and stations throughout the continent. So we'll get into it now. Gender, maybe just starting out with a definition of the concept of gender, refers to the qualities and characteristics that society is ascribed to each sex. Perceptions of gender are deeply rooted. They vary widely both within, but also between cultures. And then most importantly, they change over time. And we've seen that if you reflect back on your parents' childhood and how they grew up and yours today, you can see some big difference in gender relationships. But in all cultures, gender determines power, and gender determines resources for females and males. And really, this is the kind of the focus of this presentation today, and kind of follow that thinking throughout the course of the presentation. So now into the importance of just fisheries in general, capture fisheries and aquaculture to livelihood security. The latest UN, the FAO, the Food and Agriculture Organization, State of the World's Fisheries and Aquaculture report estimates that 171 million tons of fish were produced in 2006. So their data comes in, and there's a bit of a lag there, but this was last year's report. Fisheries produced around 91 million tons, and the production from aquaculture was the most to date. 88% was actually consumed by humans, and this is due to a reduction in the dependence of fish meal and fish oils and animal feeds, also advancements in the prevention of fish food loss and waste. Of the 91 million tons produced by the capture fisheries, the vast majority was produced in marine capture fisheries, so 87%. And then a large percentage of the marine capture in the inland waters fisheries production was produced by a few countries, and then primarily a few countries in Asia, and those are the two bottom figures. But importantly, small-scale fisheries plays a pretty significant role in its contribution to the overall production of the capture fisheries. So aquaculture production, which includes fin fish, but also crustaceans, mollusks, and other animals, including even frogs and sea cucumber, was dominated by inland aquaculture in 2016, where again, Asia was the primary producer of farmed aquatic animals globally. Inland production is an important source of food for nutrition in Africa, albeit it contributes a pretty small percentage of the global production. And so, kind of interesting in Asia, you see something like 80% of farmers are termed small scale. So meaning that small scale producers produce the bulk of what comes from the continent. Egypt's similar in the African continent. So Egypt is the #1 producer of farmed fish, in particular or tilapia, on the African continent. And again, its production is being produced by small to medium sized farmers. Nigeria is another good example with its catfish production. A lot of smallholders involved there. And then Zambia is kind of like the tides are kind of turning. It was aquaculture wasn't a focus. It was capture fisheries and contributing to the fish production. Now it's beginning to change. Smallholders are great in number, but then their overall production is low based on a lot of factors. And then now the large scale operators are coming in and producing the bulk of the production. So kind of interesting. I mean, and across, there are large operators in Asia, but on the whole, smallholders are producing the bulk. Whereas in Asia, or Africa, you kind of have a bit of a mix. Talking about employment, about 60 million people were employed by the primary sector. And so in the fish world, that means those fish farmers and fishers. It doesn't include the secondary sector, these numbers, which is more the post-harvest activities. So around 60 million were employed. 68% of that total was employed in capture fisheries. Again, in the primary sector, based on the numbers, it's 14% of those fish farmers and fishers are women. But then there's been a study by Montfort that has looked at those. When you include the secondary sector, you get a bit of an even split, 50-50, between women and men's involvement in small scale or in fisheries and aquaculture globally. 85% were from Asia, and kind of the remaining bit in Africa, and then 96 employed in aquaculture were from Asia, given those numbers I showed on the previous screen. So broadly, the two sectors support around over 500 million people supporting their livelihoods, and then the vast majority of those people come from low-income countries. The contribution of aquaculture to fish for human consumption surpassed that from capture fisheries in 2006, and again, that was the first time that had happened. Per capita food fish consumption was around 20 kg per annum, and fish provided about 3.2 billion people with almost 20% of their average per capita intake of animal protein. And that's the map showing kind of the distribution of where fish as an animal source of protein is really, really important. So yeah, fish is really important for those macronutrients, but incredibly important for the micronutrients. And then very, very important for women who are pregnant, who are lactating, and children under the age of 2, and that's what we typically commonly refer to as the critical 1,000 days period. Fish plays an important role in diets where they tend to be staple-based. So your rice-based diets in Asia, your kind of maize, corn-based diets in parts of Africa, West Africa with rice, and then that dependence on cassava as a main staple. So it complements those diets and adds to the nutrition of its consumers, and also tends to be more affordable in many contexts. So more affordable than other animal source foods such as chicken, pork, and beef. So this next part of the presentation surfaces the gender dynamics in small-scale fisheries and aquaculture. And I draw on two frameworks, one from the Small-Scale Fisheries Guideline and another one from an important publication in aquaculture. And then the studies that I cite in these slides coming up there, it's not a comprehensive list, so it's just meant to show some examples of what I'm focused on when I talk about the gender dynamics and these kind of themes that are listed here on the screen. So while men tend to be recognized as fish farmers in the sector and in control of production, women play an extremely important role in post-harvest activities in the aquaculture sector. And men in many contexts, in many countries, own the land where fish farming takes place, and then that begins to complicate the decision-making abilities concerning production for women. And while women's significant role in the processing of farm fish is pretty well documented, kind of if you look across the globe, it's kind of mixed on their involvement. Again, in aquaculture, their involvement in trade and retail. So yeah, in the fisheries, if you look in the literature as well, kind of gender research in small scale fisheries, there's a lot more studies out there. And that, I mean, it kind of is explained by that trend you saw in one of those first slides, where aquaculture now is becoming an important source to increase the fish production across the globe. But so we know a little bit more about gender issues within small-scale fishery value chains, where men tend to dominate, and then especially for commercial purposes as fishers, while women then again are heavily involved in post-harvest activities, processing, trading of fish. Importantly, women's labor in capture fisheries value chains tends to be unpaid or even expected as part of the household duties. So for example, fish maybe comes in and landed by men, and then women are there to take that fish, clean it, get it ready for market. Also, in mending nets is a common role that women play. Again, not paid for that, especially when it's linked to the household. Doing it for as part of their role within the household. In aquaculture value chain, their involvement in post-harvest activities usually brings lower returns on their investments compared to farming fish. In addition, some of the jobs that women carry out in the chain are regarded as being insecure. The example here is women's involvement in Bangladesh as shrimp fry collectors. Quite a, I guess, can be a dangerous job, but it's highly exploitative. You're working with kind of middle people who don't wish to pay as much money for the fry, but then also its studies have shown that men's pay is much more than women's in this particular trade. Broadly, men tend to own the means of production in small scale fisheries. This includes, the boats or the canoes, the seine nets, other commercial oriented gear. So it's the gear that costs money in order to increase their abilities to harvest fish. Whereas women tend to own the more quote unquote traditional gear, including fishing baskets. You see this a lot in the context that I've worked in. And it's no doubt significant, their role as fishing, and I'll talk a little bit about that in regards to food and nutrition security. But what it means, what it translates into, is their ability. They tend to catch smaller catch sizes, smaller size fish, and so they're not able to generate the types of cash that men can using those more commercial gear. Women's access and control over assets and resources in fish farming appears to be even less in aquaculture, and in particular, their access to and ownership of land and other resources, the tools, the equipments to dig ponds, for example, or nets for harvesting fish. Very few appropriate technologies are available specifically for women to enhance or increase their involvement in fish farming. And studies have shown that women's labor is often that is used for aquaculture production. They lack control of the income then generated through their labor earned at the household level. On the whole, both women and men lack access to finance or financial services in these sectors to invest then into aquaculture or activities in small-scale fisheries. Yet studies have shown that women's access to that finance is lower than men's. And then, among other things, this forces women to engage in activities that you don't have to have that capital, right, to get involved in. So those lower skilled jobs that pay less, and get smaller returns on their labor investments. In certain countries, women dominate dominate the fish markets, and others, men are the primary traders of fish. The example in Kenya, it's been shown that kind of men focus on those larger species of fish that generate bigger sums of money. In some capture fisheries settings, FAO some years back had uncovered this, what they call the loss transfer phenomenon, where when women are unable to, they're restricted from traveling, being mobile, can't get to the fishing camps that are generating the fish, to access it at the source when it comes out of the water fresh. They have to wait for that fish to come in, and we're talking mostly about fresher fish. And then while waiting, then the freshness of the fish, the microbial degradation kicks in, and then that the fish that then women access is already decomposing, and so that when they sell that fish, it's at a reduced price, and then they pay for that loss. So it's that loss transfer from the male fisher to the female processor or trader. While women may not be the primary fishers in most capture fisheries, again, when they fish, they often catch smaller amounts of fish, but also other aquatic animals, and this is primarily for subsistence purposes, but no doubt some for sale. And this is important concerning food and nutrition security, especially at the household level. And then where men, again, because they're focused more on fishing for commercial reasons, the income that they earn is also not always shared with other household members. Our experience working in Zambia and Sierra Leone concerning some of the important aspects of aquaculture. I mean, when you're growing fish, these are capital intensive production systems, most often, not always in the case of in many African contexts. But when you engage in aquaculture as a business, you're oftentimes selling your fish. You're not consuming a lot. But in many contexts, again, in Sierra Leone and in Zambia, where I've worked, there's this partial harvest, and those partial harvests, they help out with paying school fees, among other things, but also can be a source of food and nutrition. Also, oftentimes in these small-scale production systems, you have untargeted species. So in a tilapia farming system, the catfish creeps in, or other smaller fish. So that can also be a source of food nutrition. So it's those partial harvests and that untargeted species cultivation is really important, and then especially for women and children. Lack of education opportunities is also a contributing factor that forces then women into those lower skilled jobs, and especially in capture fisheries. Lack of formal training and processing, just as one example, in increasing women's and men's, but because women tend to focus more on processing, training them in how to use improved methods or technologies that could then reduce post-harvest losses and waste. When that training isn't provided, then they're dependent on those older methods and technologies that contribute to that loss and waste. Also, there's noticeable gaps between women and men receiving technical and formal fisheries training in both sectors, and this is that training post-secondary school. And as there are few women then being trained at this level, then there are few women then in the government's fisheries extension, as working as government officers, fisheries officers. And then you could also argue that then when those fisheries, so few women fisheries officers, when you go into communities and mostly male fisheries officers, men tend to like to talk to men. So there's that targeting issue as well. So it kind of explains then why women are not receiving a lot of training at that community level. The health and safety risks and prevalence of violence, and especially small-scale fishery contexts, can be quite high in certain contexts. Men's involvement in fishing, especially out at sea, can be quite dangerous and fatal at times, as you can imagine. Also, I think small-scale fisheries contexts are quite unique, and you have high consumption of alcohol and drug use, mostly because you're going and catching fish, and then you sell, and then you have that just kind of almost constant access to cash. And then there's also an enabling environment in these contexts, at least the ones I've worked in. There tends to be a disproportionate amount of bars and clubs that then is one means of taking some of that cash away from fishers. Also, the sex trade in these small scale fisheries towns, but in broadly in these contexts, is quite high. And then given the prevalence rates of HIV in certain contexts, it's also of great concern. And then related, there's the sex for fish, or fish for sex phenomenon, where men fishers demand sex for fish from fish processors or traders who want to access that fish. And that also, based on the literature, occurs at a relatively high rate. In some cases, you have women initiating that contact, not just the fishers, in the sense that they don't have access maybe to enough cash, so then they provide their sex as in return for fish. And this has been documented not only in Zambia, but also in Malawi, Tanzania, Uganda, and Kenya. And there's been other studies that have looked at other natural resources, and this tends to be the one natural resource most traded for sex. Land and water tenure rights of women tend to be much less secure compared to men's in both capture fishery and aquaculture settings. In the cases that I know best, Zambia and Sierra Leone, the residence norms. So when women marry, depending on if it's a patrilineal or matrilineal system, but most often when women marry, they leave their original village and go to their husband's village. Maybe they had land at their original village and they're not in control of that land in their husband's village. And that just creates some challenges then when accessing land or trying to make decisions about whether or not to engage in fish farming, or when accessing certain water bodies or inland valley swamp areas, etc. Also, fishing policies can have inadvertent effects on displacing people, and then in particular women, from engaging in their livelihood activities. And just the case that's provided here is in India, where a marine protected area was created and displaced women seaweed collectors. There are a lot of gender in many countries. Most countries now have gender policies, and those can be applicable to small scale fisheries settings, also fish farming communities, but often go unimplemented in these areas, in particular because of the lack of human and financial resources at various levels within government, but also due to a lack of capacities. Not a lot of fisheries officers have training in gender or social inclusion. Also, talked about a little bit before, it's a very male dominated sector. So maybe the will isn't there as well to implement these gender policies within the sectors, and especially at that ground level. And it's been shown time and time again that women are often not included in governance and co-management of small scale fisheries. And one main reason for that is that recognition going unrecognized, I guess, in the primary sector. So it's that bias towards the primary sector as fishing being a really important. You hold the decision-making power because you're the one generating the means of production. And finally, there's a major gap in the literature concerning the collection and reporting of sex disaggregated data on fisheries and aquaculture. Again, one of the reasons that you see an underrepresentation of the role of women in these sectors. Those numbers that were shown earlier on the employment is a good example. If they took into consider post-harvest, you would see a much larger percentage of women involved in the two sectors. So things are improving, though. There seems to be a lot more interest in carrying out gender research and collecting better data by non-gender researchers. But then there's a long way to go to generate the kind of necessary data to inform small-scale fisheries and aquaculture, especially development decisions that can have a greater impact on women and men who are dependent on these two sectors for their livelihoods. So while the collection of sex disaggregated data and analysis is a major gap in the literature, one knowledge and evidence gap focus on now is on the main drivers, or what you call the underlying causes of gender inequalities that were showcased earlier. The gender inequalities in small-scale fisheries and aquaculture are no doubt pervasive, and then they limit the potential, the extent to which these two sectors can can improve people's livelihoods. Unequal gender norms, attitudes, power relations are at the heart. They're what we call the root causes of gender inequalities in these two sectors. Just a bit of maybe a little bit on gender norms. They're collectively held definitions of socially approved behavior. So it's that, it's that thing in the air that makes us all do what we do, dress the way we dress, right? Think the way that we often think about who should be doing what. They're deeply ingrained, right, in the psyche, and in our identities and our how we think of ourselves, and then therefore they shape what women and men do, what they get involved in, who they interact with, and explain a lot of what we were just talking about in the previous slides. Also restricting mobility, on and on. Attitudes about gender norms are important components of institutional structures that then determine the empowerment not only of women but men, boys, boys and girls. Unequal gender norms, attitudes, and power relations therefore impact greatly on how and what and where women and men participate in small-scale fisheries and aquaculture. And importantly, the benefits that they derive from this participation. So I think the research on norms, attitudes, and power relations in these sectors is quite rare. But we know that these barriers influence the types and locations of reproductive work, but also productive work considered acceptable for women, the time that women and men have to do different types of work. So if women are doing a lot of unpaid domestic work, how are they able to then move over into the productive sphere and engage in processing at a high level that then doesn't result in that waste as one example. Also, their decision-making powers, women and men's decision-making powers and control over the income that they earn, and then their adoption and use of fisheries and aquaculture knowledge, the technologies that are available, and then the practices as well. So how can we, I'm calling it move the needle on this one, to address this knowledge gap, but also to create an evidence base on that development programs can help address the gender inequalities in small-scale fisheries and aquaculture and enable more equitable or equal outcomes for women and men. So there's two main approaches that gender researchers do use. The more commonly used one is gender accommodating approach, and it's commonly referred to as the kind of business as usual approach. So it's the one that doesn't enable a significant contribution or lead to that substantive, longer lasting change in gender imbalances. It recognizes that gender-based constraints exist, but it works around them. It doesn't address them head on and challenge the barriers that limit women's and men's participation or involvement and the benefits that they derive from that participation. And so essentially then this approach only is addressing those gender gaps, those symptoms. So if we think about that iceberg, it's that top that you can see, not that stuff at the bottom you tend to not be able to see. And those are those unequal attitudes, norms, and power relations. So gender transformative approaches, on the other hand, recognizes these gender-based constraints, but then tackles them head on, so it doesn't work around them. And it encourages critical awareness among women and men of gender roles and norms. It promotes the position of women, challenges the distribution of resources, allocation of duties, and addresses the power relationships between women and men within the household, but also among other people within their community or at other levels. And I think this is really important. It includes opportunities for women and men to jointly identify what shifts they want to see in norms, as well as providing a space to try out those new ways of being. And why I say it's really important is, as a researcher, my job is to work with, in particular, in the context where I work with small-scale fish farmers, for example, and my job isn't to tell them how to change, what norms need to change, but work with them and try to surface those more harmful norms, power relations, attitudes, and then working with them to figure out how they can shift those ways of being and ways of thinking into a more positive sphere. So it means then building that critical consciousness, which is a process of changing the way people see and experience their worlds. That can raise awareness of inequality, stimulate indignation about injustice, and generate the impetus to act together to change society. So in conclusion, gender dynamics in small-scale fisheries and aquaculture is no doubt complex and requires the use of different approaches to understand how and why and where gender inequalities exist. Research that uncovers the gender differences in small-scale fisheries and aquaculture can only inform on how to then those development programs to fill those gaps, but not capable of uncovering the underlying root causes of gender inequalities, but importantly also determining ways that development programs can address those root causes. And so research that incorporates the use of a gender transformative approach enables that deeper understanding of those root causes, and uses that knowledge then to be able to create opportunities for critical reflection by women and men, and then challenge those underlying norms or those underlying causes of gender inequalities. So through their use, it's then that research and development efforts can have a greater impact on the lives of all people who are very much dependent on the fisheries and aquaculture for their livelihoods. So I'd like to acknowledge the following big thanks for having me here this week. Mississippi State University, the Global Center for Aquatic Food Security, Feed the Future Innovation Lab for Fish, supported by USAID, and then the Social Science Research Center at Mississippi State University. Mississippi's great. This is my first time in the great state of Mississippi. I've eaten some catfish. I got to visit some catfish ponds last night, which was really neat to see. Excellent food here and hospitality, and I thank you for coming out today to hear this presentation. Thanks. All right.
First question is kind of like this question. The answer to this question, okay, what's the difference between fisheries and aquaculture?
Yeah. I mean, big difference in the sense that. Yeah, I mean, in capture fisheries, yeah, you're catching fish and you're relying on the natural ecosystem to furnish. Yeah, exactly. So in a lot of the areas I've worked in, it's floodplains. It's big lakes, both uh, man-made and natural. And oftentimes in the small-scale fisheries are multi-species spaces for fishing. So quite complex when you go to implement fishing bans and the use of certain gear type because you have to account for all of those species. It's quite difficult. Whereas I guess in aquaculture, it's about, it's farming. It's similar to any crop or livestock in that sense. So aquaculture, just down the road here, you're producing a lot of catfish, and I learned last night that about 85% of the production comes from this not just this area, but the larger area, and so it requires inputs, a lot of knowledge. Also working in capture fisheries requires a lot of knowledge. You learn that when you're young. And I think the big challenge is ahead. And you saw how aquaculture has exploded in Asia. That hasn't happened yet, and in much of Africa. So there's a lot of capacity development required. The issue of good management practices are key to reduce rates of disease when systems intensify. So a lot of differences, and I think, both require capital, both require a lot of labor. And digging a fish pond is no easy task. Sources of water, there's issues of excluding certain populations and including others. And then you heard about the gender issues involved, and it kind of sets them apart, but also brings them together. But I think they are very different value chains. And fish often that is farmed, it costs more. In the context that I work in, here it's probably, if you think about wild salmon versus farmed salmon, it's the opposite. And oftentimes then that farm fish, because it's more expensive, it only hits certain market segments of the market, those consumers who have more cash. So it's an issue around food and nutrition security then, especially for women and young children accessing that fish where they're in town and they don't live near a capture fishery to access. Nice. Hmm. Oh yeah, that's a really important point because there are um, so our institution, but throughout the CG, the CGIAR, all the senders, we have a strict mandate and to work with what we call NARS, National Agriculture Research, and extension with the services. And there's no doubt there's a void. And so we are working with them and hopefully developing their capacities through that collaboration. Also coming up with different approaches, because extension's always it's about knowing how to work with people and delivering a product that's ideally demand driven and not supply driven. So it's coming up with different types of approaches to work with farmers. through extension. NGOs tend to, non-government organizations tend to fill a gap. I think there are good examples and there are not so good examples where NGOs kind of run in and kind of forget about the existing system, not recognizing, I'm not acknowledging this is a 3-year project, and when you disappear, that system will still be there. But then a lot of NGOs do excellent work, develop capacities, and give extension agents an opportunity to be in the field, whereas maybe the budget wouldn't allow them. I was in the Peace Corps back in the day, and that was also one way to fill a gap. So we lived right in the village where no extension officers were, and provided that helped provide that service. So I think there's a lot of examples, and it's an important area that oftentimes I think gets neglected in the developing world, or in the sense that in development, I should say, in the sense that it's when extension officers go into rural communities. It's like, what are ways that you can effectively develop people's capacities, but also enable that lasting, that change to happen, and taking into account that people's income levels, and designing appropriate technologies. So, yeah.
Thank you so much. So, is your program
Mhm. Mm. Yeah. Yeah. Yep. Yeah, that's a good one too. I think with ICT, I mean, and I'll speak a lot. I think in the crop sector, it's much more advanced than in the say the aquaculture sector, where I mean, people are using phones to communicate in a fisheries context, but linkages to private sector, et cetera, through smartphone pricing, information, marketing information. I think that it hasn't really even kickstarted yet in the aquaculture sector. Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation is a, a lot of their work, and then in particular now with World Fish in Bangladesh, also in Nigeria, are beginning to think through this. How can smartphones, for example, help with connecting farmers as knowledge sharing or innovation platforms. Also, just connecting with the private sector in the sense of access to various inputs. I mean, I think ICTs and I can speak in many parts in Africa. I think in the rural areas that you're getting greater access to cell phone coverage. I mean, there's obviously a capacity gap on how to be able to interact with those ICTs. I think there's an income gap as well to be able to afford a actual smartphone. There's been a lot of piloting of maybe tablets and things like that as one means to interact and to transmit maybe a learning session at the rural village level. But it's, again, we haven't thought through it a lot to showcase that it can be an effective means of transferring information and increasing ultimately profitability and productivity, et cetera. But I think that's one of those frontier research that needs to happen. And again, based on my understanding, I think Gates is Spirit is one donor that's spearheading that initiative.
guess what? And women forever. Right now, we're seeing that technology. Imagine not having it. And what we use it for everything. People all around the world. So we're just we're figuring out. That's why we're starting out of the early, and it's hard to.
That's a good point. No, yeah, that's good. Yes. Mm-hmm. 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 Yeah, I mean, I think it's in most of the capture fishery, this isn't per se a particular issue in aquaculture, because usually you wouldn't harvest a pond if you didn't know you would have customers, or if you weren't linking into a cold chain. So it happens often in small scale fisheries, and it's also because the fish isn't, it's not next door to the town, or it would be gone by now. So it's kind of tends to be far out there. The cold chain doesn't exist, or it's not very well matured. And then what often happens, I mean, you see a lot of dried fish, processed fish, smoked fish, on in these small scale fisheries. It also helps with movement of fish. Where there is a fresh fish market, then that fish comes in and services that market. But then where there's not, it tends to go direct from fresh to being processed more or less right away. It's where the fisher wants to sell it fresh, and then it's that microbial degradation kicks in, because every second the fish is out. And again, with a lack of real good cold chains, I mean, there's ice and things like that, but it costs money. Then that's where that kicks in, and then that's where you see that fish loss occur. And yeah, so then you'll see what I've seen a lot is where fresh fish waiting, and then no customer, no ability to put into a cold store, and then that's when you start to process it. But then it's already waited. It's already, the microbial degradation has already set in. And so even when you're drying that fish, be it the sun or through smoking methods, etc., it's still there's some loss has happened during that. And then that's that loss, that kind of lost transport, that phenomenon I was talking about. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, FAO has spent, a long time thinking about this and coming up with different technologies. I think some are appropriate, probably some aren't. World Fish has spent some time. I was involved in a research project for 3 years on this, and I mean, our strategy was working, identifying a lot of prototypes, so potentials for processing fish, but then uh, we worked together with people living on these fishing camps, mostly processors, traders, and fishers, and then they modified them to fit their context. And so instead of coming in with a model or something that's more fixed, we carried out what is called participatory action research, and then they did the work. They figured out how that prototype, something that looked like this, turned into something that looked like this because it fit their needs. I think that's a good way of thinking about appropriate technology. So it's working with the end user on how to improve that technology so that it's right for them, and then the adoption, the uptake is better. I don't think we often do that, and I think that's what stunts that adoption. The same in crop sector and livestock and others. Yeah. Yes, sir.
Just to make a comment,
Mm.
character
Mm.
quick start project.
Yeah, yeah.
when we produce.
Yep.
We have quite a normal state.
Mm-hmm.
We have some.
Yep.
Multi-various.
Yep. Yep.
What's our if we have that being
Hmm.
to finalize
Nice.
now the black
Mm-hmm.
and fortunately
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
that provides
Right. Yeah, it's a big one.
generals
Yeah.
how the
Excellent. Cool. Yeah. I think it's a big area of concern right now, not just in the fish sector. I mean, a highly perishable good, but and throughout the vegetable and horticulture sector. But there are very few studies who have quantified the level of waste. We like to throw out there in the fish sector, we like to throw out there in the capture fisheries in particular, about a 30% of the fish that is caught is wasted. And it's not per se the case because there are physical losses and quality losses. And so it's oftentimes it's high quality losses and less physical loss. It's not like the fish are being wasted, completely thrown out. All right. Thanks, everyone.